This is Lee Nicholas speaking to you from my home here in Corinne, Utah, home of the Utah-Colorado Western, which is an HO scale layout in my basement. It's a proto freelance layout running between Denver and Salt Lake, built for operations, because that's what we really enjoy doing up here. I have a great crew that comes up on a monthly basis and really bring the railroad to life. Which I can't do by myself, obviously. So that's the joy of operation. I live here in Corinne, Utah. Corinne is significant in the fact that it was the last town built on the Union Pacific before the driving of the Golden Spike at the summit in Promontory, Utah. Our home here is about 25 miles from there, and it's been a big influence on why I'm in the hobby and the railroad history that's associated with that. The layout's in my basement. It's roughly 30 by 33 feet. We have a lounge off from that, and then there's a dispatcher agent office from that, and then we have active staging off from that, which we're famous for in this railroad. Is called the Mole. We really enjoy operation. That's what I enjoy in the hobby. It's what our goals have been in the last few years. We'll show you some paperwork here that we do for realistic paperwork a little later in the video. And I appreciate these guys coming back and doing this, and thank you for coming. So on the UCW, we start out here in what we call the operations part of the railroad. We have an operations wing, literally, that includes the agent job that I'm sitting at. Behind is the dispatcher, and then over here down the hall is our staging operator. So we're all kind of here together, and we have a program that we've been working on for a few years now that's called Rail Agent Plus, that allows us to print the paperwork real time during the session. So we can build each train. We know what cars are going to be in that train. In fact, I can show you a screen here in our operations center that we call the agent worksheet. Now, up here on the top, there's a menu that I brought up here that you have to put all the data in. We have to put in the stations, the gateways, which are offline staging, the industries, we have waybills, we have the trains. There's a lot of data that has to go into that. And all that data, once it's there, allows us to come into this screen here and click on a train that we're working on, and it will bring up the information over here of where that train starts and where it goes in its route. And along the way will be cars that either have to be picked up or set out, or a pole or a spot. And the agent is able to do that real time by clicking on a car over here, looking at what's on spot, the capacity, the cars that are already there, and the agent can then determine how many cars he's going to pull from that industry, how many cars he's going to spot to that industry. And all this is done real time during the session. So we actually have an active working agent. There's been a goal and a dream of mine for a long, long time to be able to do this. We had the car cards down here for years and years, and I always felt there'd be something more than just car cards, and wanted to produce real paperwork, which when we get all done and we click the button, we actually have paperwork that we can produce that are real switch lists, makeup lists, set out lists, advanced set out lists, all the things that we need to use to run the railroad. And we also can print turnover reports at any time during the session to see where we're at. But at the end of the session, we can produce turnover reports that the crews that work those jobs, their assignment is to go out and reconcile what they did, make sure everything is lined up with those turnover reports, so that we have very little, very few cars that are out of place at the end of the session. And it's really, for me, there's no work. It takes just a few minutes to get ready for a session. And when you have cars in weigh bill, the agent's really the guy that's flipping those things at the end of the session, and we're able to do those things real time now. And there's a lot of neat things we can do, like run extras when we need them, and so forth and so on. So it's really changed how we have run the railroad, and enormous fun in doing this. Is a cool job. Okay, so the other part of our operations is the CTC machine. This machine is built from parts from the Union Pacific. They came out of Pocatello, Idaho. I think it was 14 cabinets that we ended up getting. And from that, we were able to get all these original parts from the machine. The things that are really hard to come by are the lenses, and of course the levers and handles and whatnot. They're getting scarce now. The lenses are almost non-existent. So this is all original parts from that. This was a machine right here, a box, and then we took another one and cut it in half and had these wings put on. It was actually built by Rod Loader for me in Salem, Oregon, and he took it to an auto body shop. And they're the ones who put it together and painted it for us and did the whole thing. Then he got to the point where we don't even need the cases, because they could punch all these holes for us and then just weld the sheet metal together. So we're kind of in the business we're in the business of making these. Rod started this, his photoelectric business, and then Mike Burgett come into the scene, who works for the Canadian National. And there's an interesting story there, how we got hooked up with Mike, and that was because he needed some plates made, and Union switched. They didn't make them anymore. So they said, well, there's this crazy guy out in Oregon that's building them for model railroads. And so Mike called Rod, and Rod made panels for bungalows that Mike needed them for. And they're still in service today. So it's this hobby is a crazy world. It's not what you know. A lot of times it's who you know. But the machine works. We use CMRI. We've got it hooked up so there's relay box in the back. And that's to simulate the code lines going out and the code coming back to acknowledge what's going on. Of course, we don't have any trains out there, but all the detection works. These are maintainer call lamps here that you can turn on, and got to push the code button. And this is just something new we've done in the last couple of months. We used to run them through this phone system over here, but now we can turn on the maintainer call lamp here, and it lights the light on the bungalow out there. So when the crews come out, they now see that light, they know to pick up the phone, and we know which phone that we're trying to get to. So that's been a nice addition to the whole thing. A lot of stuff on here. You know, we got switches, we got the signals, maintainer call lamps. Everything has to go through the code button. We have a fast clock on the top that we use. We run at 2 to 1. Telephone system, courtesy of Seth and Model Railroad Control Systems. So Seth come up with his product, and I'm telling you, what he's done for model railroading and telephone communication is second to none. I'm converting everything over to his hangers right now. I used old parts that I tore telephone wall mounts off and took the cradles out of there, and I want to go to these hooks because they do a good job. Okay, so for the third part of the puzzle back here, this is our staging, which we, for reasons from the past, we call the mole that works back here. That name is stuck, so we'll just call it the mole. And this is where the trains are put together where cars that have that need a waybill assignment. This is where those two are put together. The car then is scanned and put into the waybill. I'll show that. This is also my shop area back here. You can't see, but I have a nice shop over here. This part of the basement, from here up to the lounge, has been dug out over a period of a number of years. And it's all been dug out by hand with buckets and shovels to get where we're at. The low ceiling is because of a high water table we have here in Corinne. I kept it at this level so that we don't get water in the basement. We do get a little seepage here and there, but we quit digging when I could stand up here and clear. So that's the height limitation. But it only affects tall guys, and so if you want to come up and operate, there's a line over there, and if you're too tall, you can't run down here. But anyway, we still love them, and they're still here, and they operate like this. But Robbie Spangler's the only one that's tall enough to have a problem. Okay, so what we do in here is stage the trains, and the cars that are going to get assigned to a waybill. On the bottom, we have a barcode right here. And what we'll do is we'll scan that, and that will then assign that car to this waybill assignment right here. And it'll add the car to the database real time. And when it's all staged, usually the mole operator will line up the cars using these angled shells all across here, and then he'll just come by and boom, 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 boom like that and scan it all in. When it's all scanned, he'll then put it in the drawers in order, top to bottom, left to right, and that train is now staged for the next trick, or the next session. So when we waybill a day in Rail Agent Plus, it waybills for 3 months because we got 3 tricks, so it'll waybill 3 tricks, and that gives us 3 months of operation. And so there's 2 months right here, or 2 tricks that are staged. So the railroad's always staged ahead. I don't really have anything to do to get ready to stage the railroad. It's all automatic now. This represents Salt Lake. This represents Denver. And this represents Casper up here. This is the CB&Q, and they have a presence on the layout and shared trackage from East Yard down to Denver, and then Denver back up to Casper as their run. The cars, once they've finished their runs, they come in here. Cars are then taken out of the trains and placed on the shelf by car type, so they're ready for their next assignment. We have phones back here so that we can be in touch with likely tower out at East Yard or the dispatcher, although the dispatcher's close enough that sometimes they just holler around the door there. But when the trains are built, they'll depart one of these 3 yards and go out into the layout, and that's where we'll go next. This area right here is where we go into staging, which would be Salt Lake. So we have a train now coming from Salt Lake, headed to Denver. So what happens is the crews come out, and with their paperwork, the staging operator will bring the train to this point. He has a camera in there, so he knows when to stop it. So the operator will come out, he'll pick up the telephone, call the dispatcher, tell him that he's on board and ready to go. So it kind of simulates a crew change for us. Okay, so our train's coming into Flanagan here. We're coming in on the siding because he has some work here. We got a few set outs and some pickups to make. And there's a operator here during the session. He has a lot of work to do, a lot of industry to switch, and there's trains coming in, dropping cars, and trains that are picking up cars. We'll uncouple at this point right here. So now we brought the train up, we've unhooked the power, and we've got the 2 yard switchers here at Flanagan will come out and pick up the cars they need, and then if there's any to set out, they'll do that. To throw this, you have to unlock it. We simulate a padlock here because this is a switch that comes out to the main, so the dispatcher has to know that you've done this. And we throw the switches by these little switch stands out here, which we built. Actually, Bruce Barney was the guy behind the 3D part of this, and Rod Loader came up with the idea of some sort of a plunger. So what we have here are scale switch stands, 3D printed. You push down on the target and it throws little micro switches underneath that allows the points and the motor to reverse. So we'll come out here and pick up what cars we need and bring them back into the yard, and then we'll bring what cars out of the yard need to go with this train, and we'll move on. Okay, so on our journey around the railroad, the next station we come to is the town of Watercress. It's a large operation. There's a lot of work that goes on over here. We kind of have it split in 2 parts. Delaney Milling is over here. This is actually a shared industry. On this side over here at Flanagan, it's called Farmer's Grain, and on this side, it's called Delaney Milling, so that we can use one structure on both sides of the layout. So we have down here Craptex. This structure was built by Pat Bray, and it has some noxious gas and a bunch of other stuff that goes on here. I don't know what it is. It's very corrosive, so I try and stay away from this. This little track over here is Watercress Yard. We also can run helpers out of here. There's a 1.5% grade that comes up behind here, and these we generally run helpers on coal trains and shove them up over the hill. So this is our helper pocket. We do have a little switch here, and then down here we have the stock pens. The loads that we had down there, what we call the lower pens, will be pushed up the hill. They'll be swapped out for the empties over here. The loads will go in for offloading the livestock. The empties will then move from here over to here, which is called the clean out track. And the cars on the clean out track will then be pulled and taken back and go back to a gateway. Also, there's an ice stack back here that we fill the reefers full of ice. They're then spotted over here depending on what the agent has in the paperwork, and whatever cars will be pulled and taken back down and either end up in Salt Lake or Denver. Part of this is my memory as a child in the stockyards at Ogden, where I spent a great deal of time with my dad. We used to have sheep, and we'd take our lambs down and offload. And I remember the pens, and I really like building stock pens, and tried to model it from what I remember. And then right in there, we also have this little diner over here called Stan's Diner, which is named after my youngest son, Stan. As we continue around, this is just mainline running here on the bottom. This is the UCW. This is going upgrade right here. This will end up eventually in East Yard, which is the eastern terminus of the UCW. This track back here is actually going into Denver, and it goes around 3 walls of the basement, comes out here, goes through there, and it goes into staging. And I left this exposed just for running trains, and we can see trains running in here. These are miles apart, but you don't really realize that in the operation. Up above is the CB&Q. This is what we call Tres Pinos Yard. And I'm sure Tres Pinos is not on the CB&Q, but we just like the name, so we call it Tres Pinos. This is the Tres Pinos Yard. Back in the tunnel back here, if you can see that, is where it comes out of staging at Casper. And this is their big yard. This is where our Hamilton Dodger local is made up, which travels the length of the model part of the CB&Q in the basement. And the CB&Q, as we go through the scenes here, will parallel the UCW in various places. So we're basically running two railroads here. And I love the CB&Q. I didn't know much about it. I started to study it. And I like it for one reason is I don't have to paint any of the engines. They already come painted. We've come up through Crucero, which is a siding, no industries, just some long running on the railroad. We've come up here to this OS, which is called Sagen. And earlier on the panel, I set a maintainer call lamp, and that call lamp I set was for Sagen. So this is what the crew would see. They would come up, and right now the dispatcher has him set to a red to stop him. So he would get off, come over, and pick up the phone and talk to the dispatcher. When the dispatcher has a maintainer call lamp on, there's various things that he could be telling the crew. Maybe there's a slow order ahead. Maybe there's an additional piece of work that he needs to do somewhere, pick up a car along the way. So there's various reasons why you would set the maintainer call lamp. And up above, this is the CB&Q. This is coming down from Tres Pinos. This is Carbon Fuel over here, one of the 4 mines that operate on the CB&Q. And that is switched by what we call the clinker. And the clinker comes out and just switches all the coal mines down the line and then ends up at Denver. And he turns around and comes back as an empty and goes back into Casper, ready for the next trip. Okay, so our next location on the journey here is our interchange with the CB&Q back here. This is called Clayton Yard, and we do a live interchange here with a couple of trains during the trick. This is the UCW main here. This is called the center switch. It's a crossover here, double track crossover, to allow us to make some pretty interesting moves, because from Sagehand all the way over to Iron Point, the railroad is basically double track with 2 crossovers in it at Center Switch and at Castlegate. So we can make some interesting moves on the layout to keep the traffic flowing. At Clayton Yard, this would be the CB&Q. There's also a couple of industries over here that the yard switcher switches during the session. This is kind of a dual role here because there's also the town of Jigs here, where there's a fair amount of switching. So this job, the operator wears 2 hats. He's the CB&Q on this side, and over here he's the UCW on the Jigs tramp. And so this industry in here is called Weston Petroleum and Construction. And this is really named after my great-grandson, who, when he was a lot younger, would come down here, and he loved to play with the trains. He loved to play with his little trucks and construction stuff around here. And so I named this industry after him. And as he grew up, he could come down and literally run the railroad. He'd make up trains and staging and bring them up here, and he'd offload the cars, and he'd have hours of fun. But as kids will do, Weston's grown up now. He's 13, and he still has interest. I asked him today, I saw him, if he wanted to sell out Weston Petroleum, and he said, absolutely not, Grandpa. So I guess we'll keep it alive for him. But he likes to come down here every once in a while and play. He might be a model railroader. I would hope someday he would have some interest in this. So, okay, so we've come around the corner here, a couple of industries back here, J.L. French and Company and Rendell Bidets are back here. In front, this is part of Weston Petroleum over here. I rebuilt this a year ago. I had to put another track in behind right here, this track, to get us a yard track in there, place we could hold cars. So that required moving this depot right here from a location down there to down here, relocating this so that we could expand everything to the front and not have to rebuild the fascia. And when I got all this done in this scene here, I thought this is where it should have been in the first place, because we have the CB&Q depot down there. This is the little town of Jiggs over here, and this is the station that serves that, and it's better served and looks better in the scene right here. The backdrops are done by Rob Spangler. Rob I've known for many, many years, since he was a teenager. He would come up here, and he's been part of my operating crew for many years, and I join him when I can on his railroad. So Robbie's been a great friend all these years. Appreciate what he's done. He's done a beautiful job. He's one of the best backdrop painters that I've seen. He's got it dialed in pretty good. So down here, this is the little town of Jiggs. Of course, Robbie painted the town in the backdrop over here. But the way the perspective goes off, and of course, we didn't do a coved corner here, it's square, but I really like the scene. He is so good at pulling things together. In fact, I told him he's so good you could just paint a structure on the wall and we could spot cars at it. He does that good of a job. We come to what I consider probably one of the signature structures on the layout, which was built by my good friend Chris Brimley. He's a great modeler, and I really appreciate what he's done. This beet plant is actually modeled after a beet plant from the old U&I sugar company that went defunct in 1973. Part of this structure right in here still stands today in Franklin, Idaho. And that's what Chris used for the inspiration to put this model together. We kind of wing it on this. We had a U&I structure similar to this in Garland, Utah, which is about 15 miles north of where I live here. And the sugar beet industry was very prominent in the state until in the early 70s. And my mother worked at the beet plant, which was just literally above our house here, where they'd pile beets in the wintertime at harvest, and she ran the scale house. My dad worked at a short time for the campaign on the beets up there inside as a maintenance guy, but I have fond memories of this and how it looked, and the industry over here, how they brought in lime and coal for the boiler. Lime was part of the extraction process to get the sugar out of the beets, and they did a lot of process through that by floating the beets around in troughs and what they call ditches. Back here, I don't know if you can see it, but this is where we offload the beets over here off the trains, which I remember very well because they were just loaded just above my house here, and throughout the wintertime they would extract the big beet pile they had and load it in the cars and take it up to the processing plant. There's a lot of activity that goes on with this. There's a warehouse over here that we load bagged sugar. Over here, we might have a molasses car in here loading out syrup out of there. And back here, we have our bulk sugar that we load out in the air slides. And, of course, the beets over here. So this industry takes a variety of cars in a number of spots just in this little peninsula. And I give credit to this. When we rebuilt the railroad in 2003 and took the staging that used to be in here out and moved it in the other part of the room you saw earlier, Robbie Spangler came up with this little bump out idea, and I wasn't sure we'd have room for it in here, but it has absolutely been brilliant, and the guys really like to switch the beet plant. It's a lot of fun. So we have dedicated beet trains that come up and just swap loads and empties over here, and then the Jiggs tramp, which switches west and behind me, and these industries comes over and does the switching over here. So there's a lot of activity going on here, and this is a fun job. And he has to manage the yard as well. So Lots of activity in here. This is called Iron Point. When Kelly Newton, my dear friend, who did all the rock work on this layout some years ago, who was probably one of my better friends in the hobby, he passed away in 2014. He just pulled things out of his head. He had some pictures and whatnot, and he said, this will look good here. So that's what he put in, and I love it. It's a notable scene in Utah down in the Price area. We have a mine here. This is the Castlegate coal mine. This is the UCW main line up here. This is the CB&Q down here as it comes down grade, and this is where they cross over one another. There's some switching goes on in here by the clinker, swapping the loads and empties in the coal. Lots of stuff going on. I could say this was an SOB to put this wall in. This was tough to do. I poured it almost like concrete down here, put a form up and then poured the casting plaster real soupy, but then trying to get it smooth and set up, it was tough to pour all this in here. I had to do it in two sections here so that we could kind of get a stair-step effect, but it's worked out really well. Again, having two railroads on the layout, just not much more fun going on because there's the CB&Q running, there's the UCW running, and we just have a good time with it. We'll travel down across the bridge here that crosses over the CB&Q. UCW will continue into this tunnel here, portal, and it comes out on this one over here on this side. You can see down here some construction going on, courtesy of my grandson Weston. He put this scene together, which he loves to do these little things, and I just let him come down here, and I never know what he's going to come up with. So next time this could be completely changed, but he's having fun with it, and I enjoy what he's doing. This is the little town of Cobre. We have some industry here. We have Bray Fabrication, CB&Q Depot. We've got Distillers Grain over here and Interstate Fuel, and then just a team track over here. I love this old water tank that I had from years ago when we had a lot of steam on the railroad, and I thought, I'm going to keep this. This is water for the town of Cobre or fighting fires or whatever they want to do with it. This scene over here, when Robbie painted this, he and Kelly worked the scenery. This is, I guess, what you call 3D, and Robbie in the background. So they worked in concert. When Kelly was putting this together, Robbie was designing the scenes. When Robbie got done, I said, you have no idea that what you pulled off here is really what I had in my mind's eye of what this should look like. My wife and I had just recently gone on a trip to Colorado and came back through where the LaSalle Mountains are coming into Moab. And there was a little stretch in there similar to this where you had to wind down this valley. And it's what I had in my head, and Robbie pulled this off to a T. So I really appreciated that. Back here are a bunch of trees that were all built by another close friend, Dave Shin, who passed away some years ago, and this is all a tribute to him over here. This right here is a dragging equipment signal. So if you come up here, the dragging equipment's behind over there, and if you get flashing lunars over here, you're okay to go. If you get solid lunars, then you have to stop. There's some cards here that you pull that tells you what to do with whatever car is called out in the train has a defect on it. This is quite neat how we do this. There's no detectors here. We simply, in the program, when we initialize the program, it will pick a random number of trains. So it could be the first train out that for the day, or the 10th train out for the day will trip this. And then the crews have to do whatever the cards say up here. This over here is a tight space we had on the railroad. There was a lot going on here. So we have the CB&Q in front here. We have the UCW main line here. And this over here is the track that leaves East Yard and goes down to Denver. We saw the counterpart of this on the other side, the north wall of the basement, where it was exposed. So it goes down, It goes into a tunnel here, goes all the way around the back wall, comes out way over there where we were at, and it's all hidden traction. We get 99% of the time. Once in a while, we'll have a little problem in there we have to deal with, but for the most part, it runs flawlessly. And I was worried that it was going to add considerable time to the schedule with that long of distance. It's not a problem whatsoever. And there's cameras at locations in here, so we can keep track of where the trains are and keep up with the whole process. We've now come down grade. We now come around behind Portland Cement here, and we come in to the UCW main over here, and the CB&Q now is coming in at the same grade level, and so we come up to a point here we now call Ute Junction. This used to be Hamilton East. We've now renamed it Ute Junction. We have Hamilton West behind us over here. And of course, this is where the UCW comes in with joint trackage on the UCW down into Denver. Portland Cement over here. One thing Pat Bray and I wanted to model years ago was some street railroading. We were really interested in doing that. And we tried to do that, but we just didn't have enough space. It just didn't work out, and what we had never was appealing. So after leaving that intact for a number of years, I decided to tear it all out. This was my second venture of using ceiling tiles, those 2x4 ceiling tiles, for the sub-road bed on this instead of Homosote. It was more readily available, easier to cut, although it's not as hard and dense as Homosote, but it works just as well, and I really like it. I've used it in other places on the railroad. I guess I'm lazy, get tired of mixing plaster all the time, just makes a big mess, and I thought I'm going to try spray foam. So there's a bunch of areas on this layout where I've used spray foam extensively to fill in gaps like this, let it boil up to where it needs to be, and then come in and carve out what you want. And it works great. It paints good, and I have no qualms in using that. It's very fast and very effective. So we come in, we have a depot here at Hamilton. Back here, we've honored Robbie with Spangler paint. He deserves it. He's doing a lot of work for a lot of people. Photoelectric, we have the Noodle Company over here. We have Kelly Steel. A lot of industry up here. So from here, we'll travel around and we'll end up at East Yard, which will be really the final part as far as the UCW is concerned on the railroad. Okay, so if we come around from Ute Junction, we now come into East Yard, which is the eastern terminus of the UCW. From here, it goes down into Denver. So the concept behind the railroad was that our yard is somewhere in Denver proper, and that our link to the rest of the world beyond this is through transfer trains that come from the staging. And so the UCW only runs coal traffic and maybe a couple other trains that would go beyond here, but everything else would terminate. This is the depot. The way the CTC machine is programmed, this is where the dispatcher sets and all that kind of stuff is in this building right here. This represents somewhere in Denver, I guess. It's called Shasta. There's 8 tracks in here, and each one of them is designated for a particular place on the railroad. Like we have Casper, Denver, Salt Lake, and then there's Hamilton, Dodger, watercress cars, Flanagan, and so forth. So we classify all the trains. It's a stub-in lead for the switch engines out of here, so the trains are all made out, and then they're shoved out to the main line and the power hooked on, and away we go. So there are little spots in here where we can bring the engines down and set them up so that we can shove the trains out and they back in. And it's worked well. It'd be nice if we maybe had an entrance out of here, but it just doesn't work because where we would come out was beyond the yard, and so this is how we've done it. We've learned this way for years, and it works well. Okay, so as we wrap up the tour here, this is the, I guess you'd call it the east end of East Yard. This is Likely Tower. Likely Tower controls all of the traffic westbound into the yard and eastbound into the yard. Here's this panel right here. And so this is a key job on the railroad. There's really what I consider 4 key jobs. There's the dispatcher, the agent, the staging operator, and the Likely Tower. Likely Tower calls all the crews, which we don't see on the wall, but we have a crew status board over here that has the names of the crews, and he can tell who's next up. They're in charge of putting their names in. When you run a train, you pull your tag off and are in service, as it says, and then when you come back, you put it at the bottom of the board and work your way up, similar to what probably most of us do. Also back here, there's 4 different slots for the paperwork for East Yard, Salt Lake, Denver, and Casper. So the paperwork from the agent will come out and hang here for the crew calls, and then as the trains are ready, call Likely Tower, and he can call the crews and coordinate that. I will say that we've had a little bit of an issue on that. It doesn't work exactly like I'd like it to. It's better. We've made some changes in it. But these are the things when you get an operation that this just wasn't as smooth as it should be. And we're trying to figure out some different ways to do that. And the last couple of sessions, we've tried some new things that hopefully will make it easier in the long run for getting crews called and whatnot. So over here, these are signals that, again, leave the yard, comes down into single track. This goes down, again, against the walls, goes around all the way around the basement, comes back into staging. And over here, we have the engine facility and Red Wing milling in here. These industries here down at Shasta are run by Likely Tower. When he has time, he can go out and pedal the cars where he needs to. He gets power ready. He's also the hostler, and he'll get that ready, also get the cabooses ready and so forth. And a busy job, key job on the railroad. Interesting thing here, this little sand tower, it's come a long ways. Rod Loader ended up with that. That's actually Tony Custer's was on his old layout, the Allegheny Midland, I think of what it was called. And when Tony was out here a few years ago, we brought him out to do the hostler dinner and guest appearance at the dinner. And so I was his driver for a few days, and he come down the basement, and I said, "Do you recognize this?" And he goes, "Yeah, it looks kind of like the one I had." And I says, "Well, it looks like it because it is." And he'd remembered that. And he says, "Well, I'm glad it found a good home." So amazing how the stuff gets around. The other thing is these little balances up here. Since we've had all this paperwork and we hang it from the balance, these are the lineups here for the trains and so forth. And it was hard to read. And so I bought these little things off of Amazon where you could push them, and they were battery operated and give you a little light. And I converted those to a 6-volt power supply and had a number of them around the layout. Well, I needed to add some more, so when I bought them, the lights were totally different, totally off. They just didn't work together. So I had some strip lighting, LED strip lighting. So I made my own little valances. They're pretty easy to do. This is a ABS product called Sintra. I think it's ABS. And you glue it together, and then I just use some black tape, which I use all around here. Just some black Gorilla tape to hold it up here, and I've got my little valance in there and my lights inside of it, and it gives out plenty of light. The guys really like them. The lights are one that I'd never heard of. A guy gave me a set, and as far as I know, what I found was common on them is they're on Amazon. They're called a COB, C-O-B light, COB lighting. I don't know what that means, but the LEDs are very, very close together, so you don't get these individual LEDs pointing at you. It's just a solid stream of light. They're wonderful. And you can get them on Amazon. They're not very expensive. They come in a big roll like this. And so if you ever need a valance like that and you need some information how I did it, I'm here. I'm available to do that. So that really kind of wraps up our tour today. I appreciate John and Alvin for being here and putting all this together. And I hope you enjoy your day on the UCW.